Dobar dan, dame i gospodo. Udobno se smjestite. Dobar dan, ravnatelju. Dobrodošli na drugi, ujedno i završni dan konferencije Dani e-infrastrukture Srce DEI 2026. Jučer smo svečano proslavili 55 godina Srca, a jutros nam je ravnatelj poslao jednu divnu porukicu svima nama srcašima. Kaže, vi ste svojim radom, znanjem i predanošću oblikovali ovu ustanovu u ono što danas jest i čime možemo biti ponosni. Pa sretan rođendan svim srcašima, ako je neko kraj vas, slobodno mu čestitajte rođendan. I ja sam jedna od srcaša, od nas 178, moje ime je Marija Herceg, bit ću s vama do kraja dana. Ali jučer smo imali doista zaista sadržajan i inspirativan dan. Imali smo profesoricu doktoricu znanosti Ivu Tolić, koja je pokazala svojim predavanjem kako napredni računalni modeli i infrastruktura igraju ključnu ulogu u znanstvenim istraživanjima, posebice u istraživanju raka, čime se ona bavi. Možda neko ko je slušao se sad pita kako izgleda moj kromosom, di stoji, kako se dijele moje stanice, ali nemojmo o tome danas. Nešto ćemo drugo imati na programu. Imali smo još i 4 tematska bloka, 7 radionica, ovo su neke fotke od jučer. I vjerujem da je svatko od vas pronašao nešto korisno. A danas sasvim nova priča. Imamo program. Očekuje nas 6 tematskih blokova, od disruptivnih tehnologija u obrazovanju i digitalnog identiteta, preko evidencija u visokom obrazovanju i reakreditacijskog sustava, pa sve do digitalnog mozaika aktualnih tema. Posebno izdvajam temu otvorene znanosti i EOSKA, koja će se provlačiti kroz veći dio dana. Jer ipak pitanje dostupnosti, dijeljenja i upravljanja znanstvenim podacima postaje sve važnije. Na programu su i radionice koje doista duboko idu u specifična područja, od cijelogenomskih studija povezanosti i računarstva visokih performansi do upravljanja rizicima i razvoja novih softverskih rješenja. Vjerujem da ste si zaokružili u programu i prijavili se na sve radionice koje želite pogledati. A sada možemo krenuti sa glavnom današnjom točkom. Došla nam je iz Edinburgha jedna zanimljiva predavačica. Pozvano predavanje nosi naslov The Business of Tech in Higher Education and Research. To je tema koja otvara jedno, možda i najvažnije pitanje današnjice, jer tko zapravo upravlja tehnologijom koju svakodnevno koristimo u obrazovanju i znanosti. Pozvano predavanje održat će doktorica znanosti Janja Komljenovič. Dolazi nam s University of Edinburgh. Njezino istraživanje fokusira se upravo na sjecište obrazovanja, tehnologije i tržišta, odnosno na to kako digitalne platforme, podaci i poslovni modeli oblikuju sustave visokog obrazovanja. Dakle, ne govorimo o tome samo što tehnologija može, nego i o tome tko je razvija, tko je kontrolira i zašto je to važno. Vjerujem da će ovo predavanje otvoriti niz zanimljivih pitanja, no prvo uputimo toplu dobrodošlicu Janji Komljenović.
Hvala. Okay. So, last month in March, OpenAI secured its latest funding round. It received $122 billion of investment. This was the largest investment in the history of Silicon Valley. The post-valuation of the company was $852 billion. To put that into the perspective, this is roughly 7 times GDP of Croatia, or 20 times the national budget. So let's take a moment to let that sink in. What does it mean if a company that was established less than 10 years ago and launched ChatGPT 4 years ago is valued 7 times the GDP of this country? Here is what I see. This is a question of power, control, and the future of our societies. Hvala vam što ste me pozvali. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo biti ovdje. Ovo predavanje morat ću držati na engleskom, ali se veselim i neformalnim razgovorima na hrvatskom kasnije. So, in today's talk, I invite you to join me on a journey to think about educational technology more broadly. I will bring together themes and topics that we normally don't think are connected, but cumulatively, they structure the realities and futures of our sector. This is a story about the legal, social, and power aspects of data, digital platforms, and AI in higher education and research. I will be deliberately just a little bit controversial, but this is to spark new ideas and to help us think about digitalization just a little bit differently. So let's return to OpenAI. While on the one hand, we have these extremely high investments and company valuations, at the same time, OpenAI struggles for revenue. There is consistent speculation about the future of this company, with many commentators speculating that it will never be profitable. There have been rumors about how this company is going to earn money, with speculations about introducing advertising or social media features, or turning to the entirely different business model. So the future of this business is not clear. But why am I talking about OpenAI? Because education is seen as one of the most important sectors for large language model companies, so much so that OpenAI released ChatGPT Edu already in November 2022. There is 1.5 billion students around the world, around 85 million teachers globally, and millions of administrators. So it's a huge sector at all levels. How students, teachers, schools, and universities adopt generative AI is consequential for companies developing this technology and their investors. What we normally talk about when we talk about technology and digitalization of universities and research, we talk about the use. How can we use it? Maybe there's discussion around total transformation or revolutionizing the sector. But less common are debates around the political economy and governance of digital transformation of our sector. So the investment in technology, the need for return on investment, the money flows, the impact of capitalization processes, issues around data monetization, strategies on value creation and their impact, questions on copyright, and staff and student individual rights. I argue that these are fundamental and foundational questions, and I will address them today through these 3 key points. Who owns technology that is increasingly relevant in higher education and research? How do they make their technology valuable and why? And why should we care? So let's start with the first question, who owns technology? This question is crucial because those who own digital technology also innovate and design specific services and features that we then use. So it's consequential. They also decide on the rules of the game. What is allowed or not, who has access or not, they collect data and process it, and so on. Here is what we see. Universities across countries are increasingly dependent on big tech and big AI companies. If we zoom into EdTech specifically, we notice a trend of incumbent or big companies dominating the sector, rather than smaller startups. Commercial academic publishers are raising subscription prices and increasing their revenues and profits, but they are also becoming research workflow infrastructures. Research data has become lucrative business as well. Let's look at some examples. This figure here shows the increase in universities' use of the big 3 cloud providers, so Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, between 2015 and 2022. Researchers followed universities in different countries and how they use these 3 cloud providers. On the right-hand side, you can see the US universities, as well as top 100 times higher education ranking universities in general. And you see that more or less all of them use these cloud providers, and it's a mixture of all 3 of them. While in the Netherlands and UK, also more or less all universities already use these providers by 2022, but Amazon and Microsoft are more common. Other continental European countries here on the left-hand side were more conservative in migrating to the big tech cloud, but we do see a clear trend. In Austria, France, and Germany, around half of universities have already moved to Microsoft by 2022, and probably more since then. But overall, we note a clear trend towards universities across different countries moving their digital infrastructure and operations to American big tech companies. In this second figure, we see the situation in the southern hemisphere. So colleagues from Brazil established an observatory where they're monitoring the big tech penetration in public universities in South America and Africa. This is a snapshot between 2021 and 2023 based on email domains. And in Latin America, they looked at 20 different countries and more than 660 universities. They found that 76 of valid domains direct messages to Google and Microsoft. Only 24% of universities are storing their services on their own servers, and Cuba was the only country in the region with 100% of its own servers. In Africa, they looked at 55 countries and more than 1,600 universities, and 60% of domains pointed to Google and Microsoft. An important point to remember is just, or let's say note, is how higher education sector is deeply integrated into the global cloud infrastructure, as I'm sure that this audience is very well aware. But this global infrastructure acts as a backbone supporting services across almost all sectors. Jose van Dijk, a prominent researcher from the Netherlands, with colleagues, proposes this metaphor of a tree. This helps us understand information ecosystems as hierarchical and interdependent structures. So just imagine this layered shape of a tree. It highlights how power is vertically and cross-sector integrated. Technologies across different sectors become dependent on cloud infrastructure, which we've seen is often provided by American companies, and this gives those companies control over entire ecosystems as well as allows data flows. So why does all of this matter? We will look at only 5 examples, just as illustration, on what is already going on in the world, but we can expect more, I'm sure. So this first example is about the automated updates of new features. As you're aware, quite often when SaaS models update their software, we receive new features. Some of them are wanted, but sometimes they're not. So I'm going to present an example of Turnitin. This is a company that most people think of as providing plagiarism detection. A couple of years ago, Turnitin rushed to include AI writing detection score in its features. So this is an example from the UK. Most universities in the UK did not want this score to be integrated into reports. This is because they thought that this score is unreliable and quite harmful for students. However, they could not switch it off because this was a default feature. So it took months of concentrated action. They spent months of work, effort, time, and resources to negotiate with Turnitin to make this feature temporarily optional. What will happen in the future, we don't know. But this is just one example where we see that it's tech companies who think and design new features, not the sector itself or the sector needs. Yet, these features are very important in how we teach, and they intervene in our social relations. They're also quite consequential for university resources, where universities already do not have very much to give anyway. In this second example, we will look at the expanded potential of surveillance of academic labor, university staff, and students. So we'll look at example from the Netherlands. A few years ago, the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security and SURF, which is the ICT procurement organization for universities, together commissioned the privacy company to conduct an investigation into privacy risks of Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint. This quote is from the report from this privacy company. And you can see how they find that Microsoft insists on a default setting where system administrators and other named users, they might be line managers, could have a detailed insight into individual work patterns. They find that this might have a chilling effect and call on universities and other public sector organizations to switch this off. But again, it's work that universities and public sector organizations need to do. But let's look at what we're talking about. You can see here the dashboard that Microsoft offers to monitor the so-called employee well-being, cumulatively and individually. There is monitoring of calls, duration, reactions, sentiments, and so on. And in this second one, we can see information about chat analytics. Again, it goes quite detailed into individuals. It's likely that most universities are not using these reports just yet. But one, there is certainly potential to do so, and we do know from research that technology and edtech companies motivate and even train universities on how to use more data and more analytics and more dashboards. And second, different countries and work cultures have different attitudes to so-called new public management measures, so even monitoring workforce, including academia. This third example is from fairly recent happening in the US. Remember the metaphor of the tree, right? With the integration of different digital infrastructures and data flows. In this example here, we can see how data from social media is connected from data from university campuses to prosecute students, so to comply with the ongoing political regime. This fourth example illustrates ongoing experimentation in the market to monetize academic content and services. Perhaps you know Grammarly. This is the established writing support company. Recently, they introduced a feature in which automated feedback is given by AI, but pretending it comes from a specific person, including academic authors. This obviously caused an outrage among authors. Some of them decided to sue the company, and at the moment, this feature is temporarily switched off. It might seem as an innocent experimentation in the market with innovation, but it's very indicative of how it fundamentally challenges human rights and individual intellectual property. In this fifth example, we see how AI companies work hard to capture higher education and research. So we see partnerships merging with universities to experiment of using generative AI for teaching and learning, but also capturing research processes in its entirety. So from literature review to data collection, analyzing, writing, and even supporting the publishing process. Here on the right-hand side, there is news from Wiley, the academic publisher, to partner with Amazon Web Services to create agents for literature search summaries and so on. So we'll move to the second question now, how and why. How do tech companies make their technology valuable and why? I will examine two cases, the value of user data, so personal data, and academic content. Let's look at data first. As you know, in the higher education sector, we collect a lot of data about students and staff. And in the edtech industry, this data is valuable. So this is a privacy statement from Anthology, who is providing Blackboard. This is one of the globally most famous learning management system. And you can see that the data they collect here is first what comes from the institution, so from student records, then what comes directly from individuals. It might be their profile information, content they post, as well as metadata about their movement, as well as information from third parties, so everything that's integrated into this platform, including stuff from social media that can be saved forever, even if things on social media are deleted. Now, to understand the value of this type of data, let's consider an example from 2020. Thoma Bravo, a private equity firm, acquired Canvas. This is the second most popular learning management system in the world. Was acquired for $2 billion. A significant part of valuation of that company came exactly from the belief in the value of this data. So at that time, the CEO of Canvas stated this, that they have the most comprehensive database on the educational experience in the globe. So given this information, no one else has those data assets to be able to develop algorithms and predictive models. So the idea is that this automation, personalization, and prediction is going to penetrate the sector entirely with the discourse of making things better. So in 2024, Thoma Bravo sold Canvas for $4.7 billion, so it doubled the price. Let's take a moment to think about the student and staff data and its value in the sector. So research, including my own, shows that there is a big mismatch between the belief in the value of data and data analytics and what's happening in the ground. I'm drawing here from two papers that were published recently. In one, we looked at universities and their practices and how they use data. And in the other, we were looking at the edtech industry and think about how they make data valuable. There are differences between these two. So universities are interested in the use value, so how can they use data to personalize learning or automate administration. But the edtech companies pursue the monetization of data. In other words, they want to find economic value. Quite often, these are at odds. When searching for data monetization options, companies often experiment with things, with different features, products, new forms of subscriptions, raising prices, see what works, differential prices around the world. Just think of examples from before, or various academic publishing and research data analytics and the rising costs from that. The question is, if this really supports the sector and its educational research mission. From the university side, from our research, we see that not really. Universities are often disillusioned and disappointed. Now let's look at academic content. We look at two examples. In the first one, we will return to Turnitin. This time, we will look at the mechanisms of how the company monetizes academic content. First, this business model requires that universities actually believe that students are cheating and that technology can help. So universities then require students to submit assignments through this platform. Here we can see a license agreement that students must accept if they want to submit their assignments. And you can see that they have to give a non-exclusive, royalty-free, perpetual, worldwide, irrevocable license to the company. They have no choice. Turnitin then aggregates their assignments, and this aggregated database becomes their valuable assets to produce different scores and analytics. But algorithms and processing are protected by patents, so nobody can really check how reliable they are. Some researchers made academic testing, and they found a lot of false positives and negatives. The best estimate of the value of this model is to look back into 2019, when Turnitin was acquired by Advanced Publications for $1.75 billion. At that time, that was more than the amount of investment in edtech in entirety a year before, and it was one of the biggest sales in edtech in that decade. So obviously now we are talking about higher funds and values of companies, but at that time this was huge. Well, this model has not gone unchallenged. When Turnitin entered the market, students in US decided to sue it for intellectual property rights, but the courts decided against students because of the fair use doctrine, but mostly because they accepted terms of use, which they had to accept if they wanted to submit assignments and graduate. A bit of catch-22. Turnitin still remains controversial, with many critics saying it reinforces distrust among students and staff, negatively impacts academic freedom, exploits intellectual property from students and staff, and so on. The second example, in this second example, we will return to large language model companies and their deals with academic publishers. The mechanism here is fairly similar. If academics want to publish, they obviously need to accept a publishing agreement. So this is from Springer to publish an article, but it's very similar across the sector and across publishers. So I'm sure you're all aware of these agreements that we all need to sign when we publish. In this agreement, the academic authors need to grant the license again to give perpetual, exclusive, worldwide, assignable, sub-licensable, and unlimited right to do things, including use publications for training. With the rise of large language models and this form of AI, academic publications became very valuable. That's because they're peer-reviewed and condensed, so it's very rich material. Commercial academic publishers make deals with these companies. For example, Taylor and Francis signed deals in 2024 that earned them $75 million. And this drove their underlying revenue growth from 3 to 15% in that year. And US publisher Wiley & Sons has earned $40 million from AI training partnerships in 2025. So this is obviously not sitting well with many in the academic community who really do not want their publications to be included in training. Authors are technically copyright holders, but they really have no power in deciding or minimal influence in deciding how their publications are used in this sense. Large language model training arrangements are irreversible, so once their publications are included, they cannot be removed. It's also not clear how authors will be attributed or compensated for that inclusion. So there's a huge discrepancy here between the legal and legitimate aspect of this arrangement. And we're now in the phase of extreme struggle between different actors, so authors, publishers, policymakers, industry representatives, and so on, just of how this arrangement is going to proceed in the future. So let's move now to the so what question. Why does all of this matter? There's lots to say about this and the impact of this new regime that is expanding, but I will mention 3 key impact points. So first, we witness a technological, legal, and economic enclosure of our sector with the concentration of profit, control, and power in just a few tech companies. They are quite often not even educational. This enclosure is then consequential for how we learn and teach, how we do research, and research indeed shows that technology structures our social relations and even our individual subjectivities. And this enclosure finally brings new governance regimes to the sector. We call this rentiership and assetization, where things like data, platforms, and content become controlled assets of companies of technology and publishing, but they can drive up prices, they control our access to key resources, and impact geopolitical tensions. We see impact at all scales, so international, institutional, as well as individual. In this recent paper I published with colleagues, we highlight the consequences for individual staff and students, and we analyze a broader set of legal and social arrangements that come together in new form of governance. So on the one hand, we have higher education-specific legislation that we're used to. We have democratic principles established here. So traditionally, we've been working with this. Students, staff can sit in committees. We can give comments to white papers at national, institutional level, and so on. So we have some sort of say. But at the same time, as now digital users, we also are governed by this property and contract law. So we have to accept terms of use every time, licensing agreements, publishing contracts, and so on. So these together form new types of regimes of how we govern in this sector. We hypothesize that this is not very well understood among staff and students and people, and that more research is needed and finding new solutions to more democratic ways of governing technology in this way. There's also resistance. So we will just look at the case from Netherlands here. This is an initiative that came from grounds up. Quite a lot of staff and students across universities in the Netherlands prepared this open letter where they demand that their universities are not dependent on big tech. So they say that dependence of their universities on big tech presents significant security and privacy risks if they use such cloud and solutions. This is because services can be switched off, which we have seen with the new political regime in US. They also say that we lose control over our data and there's no public oversight around data processing. They also say that dependence on big tech is fundamentally at odds with public values that universities, so higher education and research, represent, such as freedom, independence, autonomy, equality, and so on. It seems that this initiative from the ground up was quite successful. Here we see that the University of Groningen is already cutting ties with big tech entirely. On the right-hand side, SURF that I mentioned before, their ICT national agency, is already experimenting with universities and staff to find local solutions, hosting things themselves. So let me bring this to a close. Today I have discussed the type of technology that is expanding and consolidating in the higher education sector and research globally, who owns and controls this technology, why this matters, and what the consequences are. I recognize the digital ecosystem in higher education research is quite complex and diverse. There's a lot of open source and open access mandates, state-sponsored systems, diverse startup initiatives, and so on. But I deliberately focused on the key and foundational commercial aspects of it. I'm aware that in Croatia, quite some of what I discussed does not really directly apply, or yet, but quite a lot does, including you being embedded in this global political economy of higher education and research data and AI industries. I'm sure this brings challenges. So my word of advice is to be very careful how you manage higher education and research digitalization in future. Keep Srce strong as it is and even stronger, and the entire national digital infrastructure. So I will conclude with some very basic but hugely important ways to think about our future. First, can we think about where technology that we use in the sector comes from and how it was produced? So there are already some emergence of initiatives of public procurement to also consider questions around the technology that is going to be procured comply with copyright law and legitimate interests of the sector. Did it enclose predatorily or not academic content and data? Were any workers, specifically in the global south, exploited when training and developing these technologies? What's the environmental impact of these technologies? Can we think about that? Second, in what kind of economic and social relations does it entangle us as users? Who controls this technology? Do we have any say? Do we have any agency? Can we do anything about it? Who evaluates this technology? And then if something goes wrong, who's accountable? And finally, can we think of the good use cases? So AI is so hyped at the moment. Everywhere in the world that our research center does analysis and studies, we find fear of missing out, FOMO. So all universities are rushing into some sort of agreements, contracts, and so on, but nobody knows exactly why and what to do and how to manage and govern this. So can we take time to learn, and most of all, to digitalize this sector with care? So yesterday's keynote, I think, was absolutely fantastic to show how the digital infrastructure and technology can support good research without, the sort of rushed global competition in who will be the next best in generative AI for teaching. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Hvala vama. Imamo li pitanja možda iz publike? Imamo zanimljivo predavanje. Meni je zanimljivo također poslije, nakon ovog samog predavanja, predlažem da pitate o o Future University, kako ste nam pričali da...
Edinburgh Futures Institute.
Yes. Tako da za poslije, za kavu možda tako neko pitanje, ali sada vezano uz temu, imamo li u publici možda pitanje? Kolegica Mirna dolazi vrlo brzo.
Hvala. Stvarno zanimljivo predavanje, malo depresivno za početak dana, ali mene zanima što ako ne slijedimo FOMO? Kako ćemo držati korak sa onima koji to rade? Koje su tu strategije i možemo li stvarno imati istraživanje koje će biti kompetentno na globalnoj razini?
Mislim, okay. I'll just stick to English because otherwise I'll have trouble with expression. There's more and more research coming out also of the problems of just integrating generative AI for teaching and learning purposes. So we have things like cognitive offloading, cognitive laziness, students not really being able, so showing AI is not really helping very much. It just seems to me that this rush into adopting AI uncritically for teaching and research is bringing unintended consequences that we don't know yet what will happen. So I would say my view would be if the sector in a country or a university would take things slower, test things as they come, as they introduce them, discuss it democratically with students and staff, see what works and not, it would be far better in the long run. Because what are you going to lose? I mean, if you introduce generative AI or give access to your students a year or two later, do you really think that your students will know less? Or if you do it in a slower experimental way in conversation with them?
Yeah, well, I would say that we are having a bigger gap then. So if we are taking it slow, the technology goes so quickly that this gap will increase. That's the fear, actually, I personally have.
Yeah, I'm talking about slowness in implementation and monitoring, evaluating implementation and adjusting as it rolls out. Rather what we see across the world is countries or universities or schools just signing subscriptions and giving access uncritically to all students and staff. So that's not really bringing benefits. So, doing it consciously, evaluating every step, monitoring what happens, talk to your students and stuff, but that takes resources and time, a lot of resources and time, establishing oversight committees, things like that.
So hold your horses.
More resources.
Thank you very much.
Hvala profesoru Krpiću. Saferita.
Yeah, if you look, this is not the news, this imparity in richness of the world. It started already when the internet was developed. Content delivery networks are the gods, and we realized that 20 years ago that the content is the king. And then we realized that publicly paid infrastructural network carry the contact and nobody receive any payment in return. How you see how Europe, or Croatia is very small, how Europe can react to this big tech company, GAFAM, and new very rich company. How would you, in a few sentences or few steps, how you will be more return of this investment to the data owners? Should Europe put taxes on this company? Should Croatia negotiate extra taxes for this company? Or should we go with a community-driven initiatives and fight against those, which is hippie move?
Yes, it's $1 million question, isn't it? I think there actually is also policy and governance experimentation. So on the one hand, there are initiatives that are promoting community-owned infrastructure and also keeping the oversight. On the other hand, there's also calls for quite strict regulation and oversight at European and national levels. So these things are being developed. There are some, I would say not just scholarly, but also policy initiatives around establishing things like data trusts, maybe at a national level, and perhaps even at the international level, with a public oversight of how then data, in this case, or content could be used, for example. But this would include more regulation and more committees and more structures. So, I mean, there's no one has the golden answer of this is what you do. Either way, I can give you maybe some an anecdote from Denmark, for example, that did their national information commissioner decided that Microsoft cannot be used in schools until they change some settings and until they negotiate, and schools were not allowed to use Microsoft for 2 years. So that was quite a big measure to prohibit Microsoft to be used for 2 years in the entire country. You know, so it's making institutions that are existing stronger, but them also doing their work. You know, there are negotiation possibilities. As you know, Europe is doing a lot in establishing their AI suite of regulation, but again, big tech is then lobbying, so it's always about politics, isn't it?
Hvala, Janja.
Maybe Srce can establish some sort of national governance of AI and data, you know, and be very strict.
How familiar you are with the European Open Science Cloud data spaces? If you forget about education research data space, if we look at a healthcare data space, it's even worse. And financial, cannot mention. But I agree with the colleague. Yeah. It's basically the race in innovation nowadays, and who is faster. Nobody takes care on protection of data privacy, etc. So we are becoming more to the Chinese model.
Imamo li još pitanja iz publike? Evo imamo desno, Mirna desno. Moje desno. Da.
Hello, Iva Grabarić-Andonovski, University of Zagreb, Faculty of Food Technology and Biotechnology. Yes, I get that the mic is very silent. My question for you is, if we exclude research from using it in the training of AI models, wouldn't it be counterproductive? So we will end up with even poorer results of the use of AI tools. And the second question is, in your opinion, who should have control over the use of, what is being used in training AI tools and how? Because I see that could be a very big obstacle. You can, of course, include different stakeholders, including researchers, but do we know for sure what is the proper way of training AI models? I agree with you that we need more accountability on copyright, usage rights, etc. So in that way, we need to work more on it. But what do you think? Can we actually, I don't know, produce something quite the opposite of what we are intending to do in the scientific community?
I will answer this first with thank you very much for the excellent questions, and very hard questions as well. I will answer them with a little bit of a more abstract philosophical point first, and then I will try and go into a bit more concrete answer. So quite often we think or talk about technology as if it's just a tool. But a lot of not only social science but interdisciplinary research shows that it's performative. It makes us do things in a specific way. It structures societies in a specific way. So should it not also be part of our democratic discussion of what kind of technology we want? I cannot answer what's the best way to do this. Should all national parliaments discuss, technology? Should United Nations? They already do. UNESCO already has quite a lot of work around the kind of technology and so on. But there is no democratic opportunity to think about the kind of technology we want in future anyway. So I think this is like a general problem more broadly that's very hard, but like we should address it. And then specifically on your questions, I mean, I guess it follows from my first point. I do think that there needs to be some more democratic discussion in how LLMs are trained. Mind you that they are also very energy and environmental impactful technology. So is this the right technology for general use? So that, you know, some of it is probably beneficial, but quite a lot of the usage is not, you know. And it's also quite harmful. So I would argue that there must be some sort of democratic oversight of that. That being said, at the moment we have nothing. We don't have even, you know, how are authors going to be compensated? We just have more than, I think the last time I checked, it's more than 200 lawsuits going on about copyright-related issues. So people are just sticking to the existing laws, but lawyers say, legal scholars say, this is not really appropriate regulation. So we really have nothing. We must think about technology as infrastructure and start governing it as infrastructure. But we're not really doing that. So, yes, so I would argue we must think differently and find new ways of governing it entirely. Now, who and how and why, I mean, you know, we can bring ideas to policymakers and hopefully influence that.
Yes, thank you. I would say that the technology is developing much faster than we are as a society.
Yeah.
So I think we need to work more on the society and the influence of the society on the policies. So in that way, we are trying to do that, but we are a small community, so we cannot do much on a global scale. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Hvala. Mislim da imamo vremena za još jedno pitanje, ako je postoji. Evo ga.
Hello, Iva Melinščak-Zlodi from the University of Zagreb. I have a question related to the consequences of the things that you spoke of on open science policies, because we were, the whole Europe and in Croatia also, we were very much behind the open science and open access movement. But there are some consequences, because if we make more open content in open access, then we make it easier for big tech companies to use it and also lose control of using copyright laws to protect the content. But we also allow all other smaller players to make easier use of this content. So there are, today there are different, I think that the sentiment towards open science has been changing under the influence of development of AI. So I was wondering, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm in advisory board of the research project, a global project that looks exactly into that. You know, how, as you say, how the openness principles are actually being exploited for commercial purposes, and then what's the consequence of that. So I cannot answer directly, but we do know that this is happening. So perhaps some new restriction of openness, you know, or some new compensation for such uses. Again, we're talking about kind of new, you know, new regimes and new kind of, I guess, regulations and oversight. But I can't answer directly to that, except that yes, we do know this is happening, including on data on research, or research metadata, you know, is becoming quite a big lucrative business now as well.
Hvala. Hvala. Čini mi se da ima još dovoljno... Emire, želiš postaviti pitanje? Ne. Dobro. Ajde, danas ništa onda. Hvala puno. Meni se čini da ima još puno pitanja otvorenih trenutno.
5 sekundi.
Isteklo je vrijeme, ali zato nakon postoje prezentacija bit će vremena pod pauzom. A i ovaj je stvarno interdisciplinarno fakultet za futuriste, možemo tako prevesti na hrvatski, također zanimljiva tema, da vidite kako to u Škotskoj rade. Hvala puno.
Hvala.